she said, "I'll work your fields, master, just feed my hungry daughters." The words, stark and brittle as winter branches, sliced through the market's usual cacophony, a ragged plea tossed into the indifferent air. Elias, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn coat, a man sculpted from silence and solitude, turned his gaze. He'd come to town for seed and salt, not for the spectacle of human misery, yet it found him, as it always seemed to do, a ghost clinging to his shadow. Before him stood a woman, Leora, her frame whip-thin beneath a threadbare shawl, but her eyes, the color of storm-tossed seas, held a fierce, unbroken pride. Clinging to her skirts were two small girls, Ilara and Lyra, their faces pale, their eyes wide and haunted, mirroring their mother's desperate defiance. The merchant, a portly man with a cruel twist to his lips, had just accused her of stealing a withered apple, his voice booming with self-righteous indignation. Leora did not deny it, did not weep. She simply offered the only currency she possessed, her labor, her dignity, bartered for the lives of her children. The word master hung heavy, a stone in the belly of the day, an ancient chain of servitude she was willing to reforge for them. Elias saw not a thief, but a reflection of a world that had long ago stripped him bare, leaving only the hard earth of his farm and the barren landscape of his heart. He saw the raw courage it took to utter such a sentence, to offer herself to the whims of a stranger. He knew the taste of hunger, the hollow ache of loss, the chill of being utterly alone. The townsfolk gawked, some with pity, most with scorn, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves. Elias moved, his decision a sudden, quiet current breaking the dam of his isolation. He stepped forward, his shadow falling over Leora and her daughters. He did not speak to the merchant, did not acknowledge the crowd. He looked at Leora, at the tremor in her clasped hands, at the unwavering resolve in her gaze. He reached into his purse, the coins clinking softly, a sound that seemed to draw all the noise from the square. He placed 3 silver pieces on the merchant's counter, enough for the apple and a week's worth of bread besides. Then, his voice, rough from disuse, rumbled low. "The woman and her children come with me." He did not offer explanation. He did not invite discussion. It was a statement, as solid and unyielding as the granite hills that framed his land. Leora looked up at him, surprise flickering in her exhausted eyes, a question mark drawn in the dust of her face. He merely nodded, a curt gesture towards the path leading out of town, away from the judgment, towards the vast, lonely expanse of his acres. She hesitated for a breath, a heartbeat, then gathered her daughters, their small hands gripping hers like anchors. The journey to his farm was made in a silence as profound as the wilderness they entered. The wind whispered through the tall pines, the only sound accompanying the crunch of their boots on the gravel path and the occasional, hushed sigh from one of the children. Elias's farm was a place carved from the edge of the world, a testament to solitary labor. A small, sturdy cabin, a barn leaning with age but still true, fields that stretched towards the horizon, promising toil and sustenance in equal measure. He led them to the cabin, its cold hearth a reflection of his own. He gestured towards a small, sparsely furnished room. "You can stay here then," turning to the dwindling light, "there is stew and bread." He left them then, retreating into the shell of his own routine, the weight of his impulsive act settling upon him like the coming night. He had offered shelter, not salvation. He had offered food, not comfort. But as he stoked the fire in the main room, he heard the faint, almost imperceptible sounds from the other side of the wall, a whispered word, the rustle of straw bedding, the soft breathing of children who, for tonight at least, would not go hungry. And something in the desolate quiet of his own heart shifted, a tiny, almost painful crack in the ice. The days that followed settled into a rhythm dictated by the land and the unspoken agreement between them. Leora rose before the sun, her slight figure a silhouette against the pale dawn as she moved about the yard, tending to the chickens he hadn't realized he'd neglected, her hands, though chapped and raw, surprisingly deft. She asked for nothing, expected nothing beyond the scraps for her daughters and the meager portion she allowed herself. She worked his fields with a quiet ferocity, her movements economical, her endurance a surprise. She mended his torn shirts with thread unraveled from her own worn garments, her stitches small and neat, a silent language of gratitude. Elias watched her, his initial pity slowly, almost imperceptibly, transforming into a grudging respect, then a hesitant curiosity. He saw the intelligence in her eyes when she assessed a struggling plant, the gentle way she coaxed a nervous Elara to eat, the fierce protectiveness when Lyra coughed in the chill morning air. He saw the resilience etched into the lines around her mouth, the sorrow that still shadowed her gaze but never fully extinguished the light within. Communication was a tapestry woven from shared tasks and fleeting glances. A nod from him indicated the next row to be hoed, a subtle gesture from her pointed out a patch of wild herbs she'd found, useful for a healing salve. The children, Elara and Lyra, were like small, shy woodland creatures emerging slowly from the thicket of their fear. Elara, the older, watched Elias with an unnerving stillness, her eyes old with premature wisdom. Lyra, more fragile, would sometimes offer a fleeting ghost of a smile when he left a small, carved bird he'd whittled by the door. He found himself leaving slightly larger portions of food, an extra blanket near their room, small kindnesses that felt alien and awkward to him. One blustery afternoon, as the sky wept a cold, persistent rain, Elias was mending a fence at the far edge of his property. The ground was slick, treacherous. His foot slipped on a loose stone, and he went down hard, his ankle twisting beneath him with a sickening crack of pain. He lay there for a moment, the rain stinging his face, a wave of nausea washing over him. He tried to rise, but the agony was a white-hot poker. He was too far from the cabin to call for help, his world shrinking to the throbbing in his leg. Hours seemed to pass. The rain turned to sleet. Then, through the grey curtain, he saw a figure approaching, Leora, her shawl pulled tight, her face etched with concern. She must have noticed his prolonged absence. Without a word, she knelt beside him, her examination of his ankle swift and surprisingly knowledgeable. Her touch was firm, yet gentle. She tore strips from her own meager petticoat, fashioning a crude but effective splint with a sturdy branch. The effort of helping him back to the cabin was immense for her small frame, but she did not falter, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her determination a palpable force. Back in the warmth of the cabin, she settled him by the fire, her movements efficient as she prepared a poultice from herbs he hadn't known grew on his land. As she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration, the silence between them felt different, charged with a new intimacy. Later, as the storm raged outside, and the children slept soundly in their room, she sat near the hearth, mending. Elias, his leg propped and throbbing dully, finally broke the silence that had become their habit. "Where did you learn such things?" he asked, his voice still gruff, but edged with something new, respect. Leora looked up, her hand stilling in her lap. Her gaze met his, direct and unflinching. "My grandmother was a healer," she said, her voice soft, like the rain against the window pane. Before they called her a witch, a shadow passed over her face. "We had a small farm, by the river. It was green there." A pause, then, "They burned it. After my husband, after he didn't return from the Levi." The words were few, but they painted a stark picture of loss, of persecution, of a life torn asunder. Elias listened, the bleakness of her story resonating with the hollow chambers of his own unvoiced griefs. He saw the courage it took to share even that small fragment. He said nothing, but in the flickering firelight, his gaze softened, a silent acknowledgement of her pain, a deepening of the fragile, unspoken bond between them. The first crack had appeared, not just in bone, but in the walls they had both built so high. The tentative piece of Elias's farm, however, was a fragile bubble in a world quick to judge and slow to understand. News, like thistle seed on the wind, traveled from the market town to the scattered homesteads. Elias, the recluse, had taken in a strange woman and her two fatherless whelps. Tongues wagged, fueled by suspicion and the ingrained fear of the unknown. Leora was seen as an outsider, her quiet diligence mistaken for cunning, her knowledge of herbs whispered about as something unnatural. The children, with their watchful eyes and silent ways, were deemed odd, perhaps even cursed. The first intrusion came in the form of Mistress Gable, the village midwife and purveyor of gossip, who arrived uninvited one afternoon, ostensibly to offer Elias some freshly baked bread, but her sharp eyes missed nothing, cataloguing Leora's presence, the mended clothes, the children playing quietly with stones by the stoop. Her questions were honey-tongued but barbed, seeking to pry into the nature of their arrangement. Elias, terse and unwelcoming, offered her curt answers, his discomfort a clear signal for her to leave. She departed with a knowing smirk, the seeds of discontent sown. Soon, other visits followed. Men Elias had traded with for years now looked at him askance, their conversation strained, their gazes lingering on Leora as she worked in the garden. Whispers followed them like shadows when they made a rare trip to the grist mill. His woman, some sneered, that wild thing he keeps. The children felt it too. Other farm children, once curious, now shied away, their parents pulling them close, muttering warnings. The external threat began to solidify, taking the shape of communal disapproval, a silent, encroaching judgment that sought to isolate them further, or worse, to tear them apart. Leora, though she never spoke of it, felt the chill of their stares, the venom in their hushed tones. She worked harder, her movements becoming almost mechanical, her face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. But Elias saw the flicker of old hurts in her eyes, the way she drew her daughters closer, her shoulders subtly tensing whenever a stranger approached the farm. His own ingrained desire for solitude warred with a new, unfamiliar instinct, a fierce, protective urge that called in his gut. These were his people, in a loose sense, the community he had kept at arm's length but had never truly defied. Now, their prejudice was aimed at the small flicker of warmth that had begun to thaw the frost in his life. The pressure culminated one market day. Elias had gone to sell some early vegetables, Leora accompanying him to purchase thread, a rare necessity. As they stood by his cart, a group of townsmen, led by the same merchant Elias had confronted weeks before, approached. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold. "Elias," the merchant began, his voice laced with false concern, "we've been worried about you. Harboring such a woman. It ain't right. It ain't decent. She'll bring troubles." Another man, a farmer whose land bordered Elias's, chimed in, "People are talking. Saying she's a burden, a danger even. Those children of hers, they ain't natural." Leora stood frozen, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes darting towards Elira and Lyra, who huddled behind her. Elias felt a cold anger rise within him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. His resolve, forged in loneliness and hardship, was being tested, not by the elements or the unforgiving land, but by the petty cruelties of men. He looked at Leora, at the fear she tried so desperately to hide, and something within him solidified, hard and unshakable. Elias stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Leora and the accusing townsman. His frame, usually stooped from years of labor, seemed to straighten, to broaden, imbued with a quiet, formidable authority. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through their murmurs like a scythe through ripe wheat. "This woman," he began, his gaze sweeping over their hostile faces, "is Leora. And these," he gestured towards the girls, who peeked out from behind their mother's skirt, "are Elira and Lyra." He spoke their names clearly, deliberately, a challenge to the anonymity of their accusations. "She works my land from before sunup till after sundown. She has brought order to my home, care to my animals, and healing when I was injured. Her hands are calloused with honest labor, not stained by any wrongdoing." You imagine he paused, his eyes locking with the merchant's. "You speak of decency? Is it decent to cast out a mother and her hungry children? Is it decent to judge what you do not understand, to fear what is merely different?" His words were simple, unadorned, but they carried the weight of conviction, the raw power of truth spoken in the face of prejudice. "She has asked for nothing but the chance to earn her bread. She has given more than she has taken. Her heart," he said, his voice dropping slightly, imbued with a fierce sincerity, "is truer than any I've known in this town." A stunned silence fell over the group. The townsmen shuffled uncomfortably, their bluster deflating under the intensity of his gaze. Leora looked at him, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears, a mixture of shock, gratitude, and a dawning, tremulous hope. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted irrevocably. He was no longer just her reluctant protector, he was her champion, her ally. They were a unit, bound not by pity or obligation, but by a shared defiance against a hostile world. The men eventually dispersed, muttering amongst themselves, their certainty shaken, though their prejudice likely remained. But Elias had drawn his line in the sand. That evening, as a bruised and turbulent sky mirrored the day's unrest, the true climax of their trial began to unfold. A wind, sharp and cruel, whipped around the small cabin, heralding a storm of unusual ferocity. It had been brewing for days, a malevolent presence on the horizon, and now it struck with the fury of a vengeful god. Rain lashed down in blinding sheets, turning the farmyard into a muddy quagmire. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the roof shingles, rattling the very foundations of the cabin. Elias fought to secure the barn doors, the wind threatening to rip them from their hinges. Inside, Leora worked with a desperate urgency, stuffing rags into the cracks in the window frames, herding the terrified children to the safest corner of the room, away from the groaning walls. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoed above the storm's roar of a massive oak tree at the edge of the creek, its roots loosened by the saturated earth, crashed downwards, directly towards the section of the barn where the livestock huddled in terror. Elias, caught outside, could only watch in horror, helpless against the raw power of nature. But Leora, her face pale but resolute, acted. "The animals," she cried, her voice barely audible above the tempest. Before Elias could react, she was out the door, battling her way through the driving rain towards the imperiled barn. He shouted after her, but his words were swallowed by the wind. He stumbled after her, his mended ankle protesting. He reached the barn just as Leora, with a strength he didn't know she possessed, was heaving at the swollen, jammed side door. Inside, the animals were frantic. Then, as another gust of wind tore a section of the roof away, exposing the terrified creatures to the deluge, Leora did something extraordinary. She began to sing. Not a song of words, but a low, melodious hum, a sound that seemed to weave itself into the storm's fury, yet remain apart from it, a thread of calm in the chaos. It was an ancient, wordless lullaby, a sound that spoke directly to the primal fear of the animals. Slowly, miraculously, the panicked bleating of the sheep quieted, the horses' terrified whinnies subsided. They turned their heads towards her, their eyes still wide, but the frantic edge was gone. It was as if her voice, imbued with some profound, almost supernatural intuition, resonated with their animal spirits, offering a sliver of solace amidst the terror. Elias stared, dumbfounded, as Leora, still humming, moved calmly among them, her touch gentle, her presence a beacon of peace. Together, in the heart of the raging storm, they worked, Elias using his strength to clear a path, Leora using her incredible, inexplicable gift to guide the now docile animals out of the collapsing structure and into the relative safety of a smaller, more sheltered lean-to. Her intuition was their salvation, her strange, quiet power had averted a disaster that his brute strength alone could not have. The storm raged through the night, a relentless assault on their small sanctuary, but inside the battered cabin, a fragile peace had taken root. By dawn, the tempest had exhausted itself, leaving behind a world washed clean, yet scarred. The great oak lay like a fallen giant, its branches tangled with the wreckage of the barn's creekside wall. The fields were flooded, a testament to nature's untamed power. But they were alive. The animals were safe. Elias and Leora, soaked to the bone, mud-streaked and utterly exhausted, sat before the newly stoked fire, the sleeping children bundled nearby. The silence between them was no longer one of caution or unspoken agreements, but of shared ordeal, of mutual reliance, of a profound, unspoken understanding that had been forged in the crucible of the storm. The immediate danger had passed, and in its wake, the emotional dam within Elias finally broke. He looked at Leora, her hair plastered to her face, her clothes torn, yet in her weary eyes, he saw a strength, a resilience, a quiet beauty that struck him to the core. He reached out, his calloused, work-worn hand hesitantly covering hers where it rested on her knee. Her skin was cold, but her fingers curled instinctively around his. Words had always been difficult for him, clumsy tools for the deep currents of his soul. But now, looking into her eyes, he found the ones that mattered. "Leora," he began, his voice raspy, thick with emotion. "This place, it was just land and timber before you came." Empty, he swallowed, the confession raw and unfamiliar on his tongue. "You and the girls, you've made it a home." He paused, searching for the right way to say what lay in his heart, a sentiment so vast and new it almost frightened him. He picked up a small, smooth stone from the hearth, a stone Lyra had often played with, and placed it in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "This is your home now. If you'll have it." Our home, it was not a grand declaration of love in the poetic sense, but it was everything. An offering of permanence, of belonging, of a shared future. Leora's eyes, already luminous, filled with tears. They traced silent paths down her mud-stained cheeks. She did not speak, but her gaze held a universe of emotion, relief, gratitude, and a tenderness that mirrored his own. She leaned her head, just slightly, against his shoulder, a gesture of complete trust, of acceptance. It was her quiet, profound yes. Months turned into seasons, and seasons into years. The scars of the great storm healed, replaced by the vibrant green of new growth. Elias's farm, once a place of stark solitude, transformed under Leora's intuitive touch and their shared labor. Flowers bloomed in unexpected corners, their colors a joyful rebellion against the monochrome past. The fields yielded bountiful harvests, the barn was rebuilt, stronger than before, a testament to their combined strength. Ilara and Lyra, no longer haunted by shadows, grew tall and bright, their laughter echoing through the meadows. Ilara, with her mother's wisdom, became skilled in the lore of plants and healing, her quiet observations often proving invaluable. Lyra, her shyness melted away, filled the homestead with songs and stories. They were a family, bound not by blood in the conventional sense, but by a love that was deep, quiet, and unshakable. The community, once so quick to condemn, slowly, hesitantly, began to change its tune. Stories of Leora's calm during the storm, of her almost mystical connection with animals and her knowledge of healing, spread. Fear turned to grudging respect, then to a kind of awe. People began to seek her out, not as an outcast, but as a woman of rare gifts, her wisdom sought for ailing livestock or a child's persistent fever. Elias, watching her, felt a quiet pride that warmed him to his soul. Their love was not one of passionate pronouncements, but of shared sunrises, of hands brushing as they worked side by side, of comfortable silences filled with understanding. It was in the way he mended the children's shoes, and the way she knew just how he liked his tea. It was a love etched into the landscape of their lives, as enduring and elemental as the earth itself. They had found their sanctuary, not by escaping the world, but by creating their own, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the quiet miracle of a second chance. And so, their story, like a river finding its way to the sea, settled into a gentle, enduring rhythm. A testament to the idea that sometimes, the most profound connections are forged in the fires of adversity, and the deepest love speaks in whispers, not shouts. Now, I ask you, as you reflect on Elias and Leora's journey, have you ever witnessed the strength that can blossom from vulnerability? Have you seen how acceptance can transform a barren life into a field of abundance? Perhaps their story resonates with a quiet corner of your own heart, reminding you that true belonging is not about fitting in, but about finding those souls with whom your spirit can finally, truly, be at peace. If their tale of resilience, love, and the courage to build a sanctuary against the odds has touched you, please consider subscribing to our channel. We'll continue to bring you stories that explore the depths of the human heart and the enduring power of connection. Thank you for listening.